Okay, this is video 4 of 10 in the Joseph Jackson testimony in Nauvoo, where he basically went undercover, discovering the spiritual wife system, the Danites, and every abomination that Joseph Smith was doing under the noses of most of the saints that had no idea what was going on in early Mormon history, Nauvoo, Illinois, the 1840s. You're in the Mormon Truth Video Library, MTV Library, on the Dodger Game channel. The channel button's next to the subscription button, bottom of the video description, and we've got about 75 videos or more in there describing Mormon history and doctrinal changes. About 3 days after my return from Missouri, Joe had his carriage brought out and invited me to take a ride with him. I soon found that there was something wrong, and when we reached his prairie farm, or in other words, the farm of the Apostle Lot, who tills it for him, I learned the secret of his depression. He took me to one side and began to talk to me about his wife. He told me he thought I had better get another boarding house. I was then boarding with him, for he thought that his wife loved me more than she did him. He, at this same time, cursed William Law for trying to seduce his wife, which in my opinion was false. He continued to talk about his wife until my anger got the better of my prudence, and I then told him he must stop such conversation to me, and that I would not hear him rail out on so worthy a woman as I believed Emma to be, and threatened to knock him down if he did not cease. I told him he was a darned rascal, and he thought every other man as black-hearted as himself. At the same time, I accused him of living in fornication with other women, and that he especially should hold his peace in regards to Emma. To these aspersions he made no angry retort, but would not at that time own that he lived in fornication with other women, and said he was a godly man in every act, but that Emma was jealous of him. He then asked me if I had ever known him to do anything wrong with the women. I replied that I had not, but that in my opinion, any man that was base enough to concoct schemes for the pillage and murder as he had done would lie with any other woman, if she would permit him. He then said it was no use to talk to me. I answered that it was not, for I had some experience in the ways of the world. We then re-entered the carriage and rode to the city. Joe went home, and I went to Snyder's, where I had boarded previous to my trip to Missouri, and took up lodgings. About 2 days after this, Joe came down the street on horseback. I met him and told him I thought of going south, and was very sorry I could do nothing for him in Missouri. I made him believe it. He then pressed me to stay and enter into the manufacture of bogus, that means counterfeit money, to which I consented, hoping to be able to get a clue to another brand of his villainy. Shortly after this, he sent $200 to St. Louis for German plate, and went to work on a remote part of the town to fit up for operation. The details concerning the bogus operation in the city I will give in a subsequent part of this narrative. About the time his bogus business commenced, H.T. Wilson returned from the South, and in company with him was Mr. Reynolds, the agent of Missouri, bearing a requisition from the governor of that state. When he returned, he heard reports in circulation that I had actually joined the Mormons, which so much diminished his confidence in me that he did not come to see me, as he promised he would do. At this time, Joe was on a visit to Dixon's Ferry, and Wilson and Reynolds proceeded hither, reporting as they journeyed that they were Mormon preachers. In the meantime, word of what was on foot reached Nauvoo directly from Springfield, from whom I do not know, but at all events, Stephen Markham, I think that's the stake president of Nauvoo, and William Clayton were dispatched to Dixon to warn Joe, or to bring back word of what took place. In a few days, Clayton returned, bringing news that Joe was arrested, and an order immediately issued from Hiram for parties to start out to rescue Joe. One party I was placed in and was compelled to go to prevent suspicion on myself. It consisted of 25 men. Our directions were to proceed directly to Dixon and release Joe at all hazards. I acted as pilot, and Dr. Foster proceeded ahead. I guess means reconnaissance. We were all armed with sidearms. On the prairie above La Harpe, I led the company astray purposely, that Wilson and Reynolds might get ahead. We all got lost and wandered about for a day without making any progress on our journey. In the meantime, another party had proceeded directly up the river and met Joe, Wilson, and Reynolds, all in the custody of the sheriff of Lee County, proceeding southwards. They escorted Joe to the city and would not suffer the officers to take any other direction. This fact we learned and returned to the city. At Nauvoo, the writ of habeas corpus granted at Dixon was tried before the municipal court and Joe released. Wilson and Reynolds then effected their escape from the city. Seeing all hopes of bringing Joe to justice baffled for the present, I determined to continue my game. A few days after this, I had a private conversation with Joe, and he again wished that I should go to Missouri to serve Rockwell. I consented, and he fitted me out with a horse and a sulky for my journey. My directions were to go to Liberty and get the pistol that Rockwell shot Boggs with, it being in the hands of a widow woman living in that town, who Rockwell had deposited it with. Rockwell feared it might be discovered and identified and produced in evidence against him, and therefore his wife, on her return from Independence, requested Joe to have this instrument secured. On the morning of the 4th, I started on my journey. Joe said that it was an excellent day to fool the people with, for they would think I had gone to celebrate the day at some place in the neighborhood. I crossed the river at Montrose. From thence I went to St. Francisville, and from thence to Monticello. About 5 miles beyond this town, my horse became so restive from the biting of the flies that he commenced running and kicking. The lines broke, and presently the shafts, and I saved myself by a timely leap. The horse took a circle on the prairie and soon came back near the point from whence he started. When I caught him and rode back to Francisville, where I hired a man to bring in the sulky, I returned to Nauvoo. I neglected to mention that when starting, Joe told me to sell the horse and sulky and board until I could kill General Donathan. But my plan was to get the pistol and what secrets I could from the old woman at Liberty and advise General Donathan, I think it's Donathan really, of what was going on in relation to him. My luck, however, was bad, and my plans failed. On returning, Joe wished me to go to Missouri by water, but wanted me to pledge myself to kill General Donathan. I feigned sickness, and by this means escaped further importunity. In the meantime, the bogus establishment had been moderately fixed up, and Joe suggested the idea of buying Rockwell out of prison in the fall, or just as soon as he could get enough manufactured to do it. Day after day passed, and I managed my cards so well that I was enabled to probe still deeper into the secret measures and transactions of this wretch. He frequently, in our walks, which we took nearly every day, pressed me to join the church and marry, and to induce me to take a wife. He took me to houses where he kept his spiritual wives, and introduced me to them all. On leaving, he would urge me to take my choice, or at any rate, to take 2 or 3 spiritual wives. If I did not wish to marry, I was determined, however, to form no connection with any woman, that my actions might in all things be perfectly free, and that they might hold no rod over my head. As I've mentioned the subject of spiritual wives, I will in this place give the reader some idea of the system. The doctrine is called the Spirit of Elijah, and is kept a profound secret from the people at large, and is only permitted to be known by those to whom it is given to know the fullness of the kingdom. In other words, the choice spirits who surround Joe and aid in carrying his secret measures. The doctrine is found on the 3rd chapter of Hosea. Several passages from the writings of Solomon and David, and the passage, "Whatsoever ye bind on earth shall be bound in heaven." From these scripture passages, with which I am not sufficiently familiar to quote, aided by revelation from Joe as respecting their meaning and construction, the doctrine is derived that there is no harm in a man having more wives than one, provided his extra wives are married to him spiritually. A spiritual wife is a woman who by revelation is bound up to a man in body parts and passions, both for this life and for all eternity, whereas the union of a carnal wife and her husband cease at death. Whenever the scripture forbids a man from taking to himself more wives than one, Joe made it refer to carnal and not spiritual wives, and would frequently quote the writings of David and Solomon to prove his position. Having an explanation of the doctrine, let us see the application. Joe had in his employ certain old women called mothers in Israel, such as Mrs. Taylor, old Madam Durfee, and old Madam Sessions, in whom the people have great confidence. But in fact, they are the most depraved hypocrites on earth. If Joe wishes to make a spiritual wife of a certain young lady, he would send one of these women to her. The old women would tell the young lady that she had seen a vision in which it was revealed to her that she was to be sealed up to Joe, or his friend, as the case might be, as a spiritual wife, to be his in time and eternity. This would astonish the young innocent, but Scripture would soon be resorted to prove the correctness of the doctrine, and that it was proper in the sight of the Lord. Soon after this, Joe would appear and tell the lady that the Lord had revealed to him that Mrs. So-and-so, such as Mrs. Durfee, for instance, had had a vision concerning her and had been to see her. Not suspecting any collusion, the young lady would be astonished, and being strong in the faith, she would have no doubt but that Joe spoke by authority of God. He would then ply his arguments, and with the utmost sanctity speak in the name of the Lord, and say that at such a time and at such a place it had been revealed to him that she should be his or his friends in time and eternity. If she objected, he would quote his scripture and his revelations, and thus by playing on her superstitious credulity and artfully at the same time inflaming her passions, he seldom failed of his object. Once being successful, he held the fear of exposure over her as a rod to prevent rebellion from his allegiance. When this happened, in the case of Miss Martha Brotherton and Miss Nancy Rigdon, his overtures were rejected with disdain and exposure threatened. He would set 100 hellhounds on them to destroy their reputations. This was a specimen of the mode and manner of Joe in carrying his vile measures of seduction. To the truth of what I have said here, there are hundreds who can testify. I have no doubt would do it if they could be protected from the revenge of the hellish clan, which still exists in Nauvoo. The extent to which this abomination was carried may be imagined from the fact that Joe Smith boasted to me that he had, in this manner, from the commencement of his career, had seduced 400 women. Well, you know, he's still got a reputation with a lot of the Latter-day Saints due to the correlation department that makes him into a folklore hero, like unto Paul Bunyan in the Relief Society and priesthood manuals, probably in the Sunday school manuals as well, I'm sure. But I know that he is, but it seems I'm especially reminded by priesthood manuals. So that to think that he could be capable of much worse than occasionally saying "gosh darn" would be unthinkable. Therefore, to present something so opposite to that, the character that's been built up, the image that he has, is probably too much for most members of the church to even fathom. They would say, "Oh, that's just too far. That's too far out from reality." And they've been conditioned to believe in something that's so different from that, and to reject anything as of the devil. On the road to apostasy, any allowing yourself to think rationally about anything that would give credence to the notion that the all-powerful, all-wise, unchanging, fair, and loving Jesus Christ is guiding the church through his holy prophets. It worked then, and apparently it's still working. On to the next video.